Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I am Chris Weuve, and this is Starfleet Tactical. And I have with me Merle Robinson, who I'll do the introduction for in just a second. But I want to start off by saying, Merle, you're an idiot.
Thank you.
So that's because Merle said that I was going to call him an idiot at some point during this thing. And I thought I'd just go ahead and get it out of the way. Let's just go ahead and put it out there on the table so that it's ready to rock and roll.
Okay. Entertainment value. That's the way it works.
So Merle is a longtime friend of mine. If you have been to the Origins or Dragon Con gaming conventions, you perhaps recognize him as one of the people who runs the National Security Decision-Making game, which is where I first met him. And if you, by any chance, happen to view the Connections Online conference, you may recognize him as being one of the people that runs the Connections Online conference. And we have our mystery third guest. Hello, Alec. How are you?
Howdy, howdy.
So Alec and I have not been in comms all day because Alec is the busiest man on planet Earth right now, or at least one of them, and he's running around. And so, Alec, I will tell you right off the bat, if you want to run off and go do whatever, put out whatever fires you have to go put out, Merle and I can handle this. But that is not me saying, please go away. That's me saying I'm giving you the option of, you don't have to bail me out anymore because I actually found somebody else to do the show.
I'll stick around for a little while.
Okay. All right.
Maybe multitasking.
Yeah, that's fine. You go ahead and multitask. So Merle is one of the principals behind the National Security Decision-Making game. In fact, let me find.
Yeah, you could call me head cat herder for the last.
He's the head cat herder.
15 years, yeah.
I'm going to put the link to their website in the chat, which I have the power to do from directly within StreamYard. You can't do it from the outside, right? You can't do it through YouTube, but you can do it through StreamYard. So I'll go ahead and put that in there. And if anybody wants to go there, they do gaming events that are usually historically oriented, almost always historically oriented in some way, shape, or form. And they do very, very, very well put together stuff. And so if you are at any of those gaming conventions, you should look them up. Merle, anything else you want to say about NSDM before?
So if somebody wonders what we are, we focus on geopolitics, internal and external tensions in groups, and how decisions are made. And if you look at the website, we really pitch, culture, circumstance, choices, and consequences. That's our new 4 C's. But our job is to get people to think, which is kind of dangerous. And we run Cold War games from the early 60s, contemporary games with modern countries. We've done a couple of futures things and experiments like American Revolution kind of stuff. And we do lectures because we're geeks. So we cover technology and history and wargaming and stuff like that.
And they're officially a 501c3
educational nonprofit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's see. Alec, how have you been?
Yeah, busy. Busy. I actually hired an assistant to help with the animal rescue, and I think I'm doing as much work as I was doing before. So there's some problem with that. She decided to rescue a litter of 6 dogs and a litter of 6 cats, in addition to what we were doing. So things got real hectic for a little while, but we're gearing up for our what I hope is our final shoot for Axanar. 2 insert shots that we need, one for episode 4, one for episode 5. And one involves a Klingon, so Klingon makeup. And also I was taking one of the tunics today to, I had to drive all the way out to Alpharetta. It was an hour and 15 minutes away to meet a seamstress because the tunic is a men's large and we need it fitted to a woman. So so driving around. Then I stopped by the studio today because they're hanging the green screen for the shoot this coming weekend. And
you heard it here first, folks. There is a woman in Axanar.
Yes, there's
a female Klingon. That's not exactly the same.
Female Klingon.
Female Klingon.
Yeah. So yeah, so I've been doing all of that, and yeah, a lot of Axanar, a lot of Axanar animal rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's good to be busy. I spent most of the week sick, although I was working. I work from home on the computer that you can't see that's right next to me here, which is where I got my work set up. Wright Sublette points out that today is the 83rd anniversary of the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. That's Washington versus Hiroshima versus South Dakota. So with Admiral Willis Lee, who is my all-time favorite naval officer, or at least my all-time favorite admiral. And that was a fantastic and a fantastic battle. And it's a total and complete shame that they decided to turn that ship into razor blades. Because the Washington is my favorite battleship of all time, and they turned it into razor blades. So,
well, at least they didn't make it a reef.
Yeah. So
you remember back in the ancient days of yore when I was a working stiff, unlike sort of like you. One of my careers with the Defense Reutilization and Marketing Service, which I am not speaking for, by the way, because they are not my employer, nor would they let me speak for them in any other capacity for the most part. But the site that I worked at disposed of naval vessels. We were the only place in the country that did that. We had an expert who I regularly talked to and heard all the inside scoop on which things became reefs and what bells were taken out and given to flag officers and other dignitaries. So sometime we need to have that chat.
We should. All right. I did put together a handful of slides to sort of focus the conversation a little bit, to prevent, I can wander. Oh my God, can Merle wander? So it's probably worth having a little bit of focus. So let me go ahead and throw those up real quick. And oh, by the way, I build this also as being a question and answer show. So if anybody's got any, and that's largely because I was sick this week and I didn't have a whole lot of time to do any thinking about the show. And the subject of Prime Directive was just sort of something I stumbled across on YouTube. And it's like, yeah, I want to do that. And so I decided to go ahead and do it as something that, people could speak extemporaneously on if we had to. But I did have some time today to put together some slides. I actually had a really productive day. I was showing Merle, I got all but one thing done on my to-do list. And one of my things I did on my to-do list was I had dinner with Pat Doyle. And so I am wearing this shirt because 4 hours ago, actually not even 4 hours ago, about 2 hours ago, this shirt was in the same room with Pat Doyle. So he is currently.
I haven't seen Pat in forever.
I'm sorry, what?
Haven't seen Pat in forever.
Yeah, he's when he switched airlines, he went from being a simulator guy, which meant he generally had a schedule, he slept in his own bed every night, et cetera, to being a regular working stiff Skybus guy. So he's just always flying around. And like right now, he's in bed trying to sleep, probably failing because it's a little early. Because it's only he normally lives in the central time zone, so as far as his body's concerned, it's only 8 o'clock. But he's got like a 4 a.m. wake up tomorrow to fly back to Minneapolis, and so that's why he's not on the show. But we did go and have dinner like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30, something like that. So. Okay, so let me go ahead and flip it over. Here's the general agenda. We're going to do some admin stuff, which is the usual schedule slide. I've got it's only about 7 or 8 slides altogether, including a brief history of the Prime Directive in both the real world. Well, why did they add this to the series? And in universe, some reasons why you might actually have a Prime Directive, or why they say that, why Starfleet says it has a Prime Directive, a few theoretical examples that are worth thinking about, and then trying to sort of rebuild the Prime Directive into something coherent. Because I would argue it is not coherent. And I'm looking at you, Jean-Luc Picard. I'm looking at you, the TNG writers room. Let me put it that way. I'm looking at you, TNG writers room. It's not an in-depth discussion. I watched precisely 0 episodes to prep for the show. I did listen to a shit ton of YouTube videos. But one thing is clear, the guy on the right-hand side here is the guy who kind of invented the Prime Directive. He's we first see it in Enterprise in the timeline. They're clearly thinking about those things. and we find out that the Vulcans have their equivalent of it. None of this has really changed. In fact, the only thing that changed on this entire slide was I changed it from "Have you pre-ordered Joel Presby's Ringer yet?" to "Have you ordered Joel Presby's Ringer?" because it's out. I'm still planning. Today is the 15th. We're doing a show right now. It is still the case that on the 22nd, which is next week, I will be at PhilCon, saying hi to Bob and some other people. On the 28th, I plan to be in. Actually, at this point on the 28th, I'm probably going to be in Merle's guest room, sleeping, getting ready to go to sleep so I can drive back to here the next day. Because I'm going to go visit. I'm going to go visit my library, and Merle is putting me up for the night after I spend part of the day moving boxes. That's the current plan anyway. Merle commented that he's no longer employed and doesn't speak for previous employers. I don't speak for previous or current employers either. Alec is his own employer, so presumably he speaks for himself, but I should let him speak for himself about whether he speaks for himself.
I speak for myself.
Okay, cool. I did my usual thing of pulling images off the web. I think they're all Paramount. I don't, they're used for purposes of critique and education and all the other magic buzzwords.
All the fair use stuff. Yeah.
All the fair use stuff.
Fair use stuff is us.
Okay, so the brief history of the Prime Directive in the real world. It was introduced in the TOS Season 1 episode Return of the Archons, which, so why do I have a Daedalus class ship there? That's because it has been retconned that the USS Archon was a Daedalus class ship. So that is not the Archon there, that is the Horizon, but that's the class of ship that was lost on the planet. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, which one is Return of the Archons? The easiest way to get it back in your head is Festival. So it's the one with Landru and the computers and all the rest of it. Roddenberry apparently said somewhere, I've heard it said that he said this, but I have not seen where he said it, that it was explicitly a response to the Vietnam War about, not poking our nose in other people's business, which is really interesting because you go a little bit further in the series and you get the episode of Private Little War, which is very much about the Klingons poking their nose into somebody's business. And so the Federation responds by also poking their nose in to keep a balance of power. Makes me wonder whether the TOS writers room did some more thinking about that and decided to put a finer point on that. But, I don't know. And, I should have asked Sean Barnett, because he was also at dinner with me and Pat Doyle. Sean's done a lot of reading about the original series. Like there's a 3-book set, 1 book for each season that goes into all the details of the original series, and maybe that would know. So in the real world, you really see the Prime Directive hammered home in the Next Generation, and every series had at least 1 or 2 Prime Directive episodes, except for TNG, which had about 400 episodes in the Prime Directive. And they were kind of largely incoherent, I would argue, for reasons I'll get into later.
So, Chris, I think this is a great point to come back to what you often
just going to turn to you, Merle. Go.
You often pitch that none of the things we're going to talk about is meant to get someone to not enjoy the shows.
Yes.
It's meant to get them to think about things.
Yeah.
And since you're going to come to me, I actually have a couple of my own slides that I'm not going to put up, but my outline. So One of the things I want to point out is, when we talk about the Prime Directive and we talk about Star Trek, it's basically a vision of how to integrate things together in an idealized post-scarcity society. And it's alternatively using the thoughts of the original creator and all the inheritors, because that's why we get all this, revisionist versions and canon adjustments. So we want to recognize inheritors and that they violate and rewrite earlier interpretations. But Star Trek is really one big thought experiment.
Yeah.
It's all about how the world could be better. And you might disagree with how they did it, but it was part of the idealism of the 60s. And it's very much a product of the era because it's trying to figure out where we should be going. So what we tend to do is we rationalize the parts we like and we use our imagination to make it our own universe. And like, who watching the show doesn't have their own version of Star Trek and the things they use or don't use, whether they role play or write or just think about it? Because it's like, oh gosh, I mean, I don't think about Deep Space Nine, says one person, and the other person says, oh gosh, what they did with the Andorans, it goes on and on and on. So food for thought.
Yeah. And the original series was not necessarily subtle about when they had a message. I mean, Frank Gorshin being painted half black, half white was not particularly subtle, right?
Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic episode. I love the episode, but it was kind of obvious the message they were trying to send, which is great message. Go ahead, trumpet it from the mountaintops. So, but somebody made the comment, I can't remember who it was, but that it was more of a plot device than it was world building, right? It really, especially in the original series, it very much showed up as, but even after that, it very much showed up as we're going to throw this problem out and they're going to have to work their way around it. And in the original series, it was usually like, we're going to figure out a way around the Prime Directive. And then in Next Generation, about half the time is we're going to do something absolutely horrible because it supports the Prime Directive. And the other half of the time was, well, we figured a workaround. So, One Horse Shape points out that, the Prime Directive is ignored for Spock's mission to support unification on Romulus. That they conveniently forgot the Prime Directive existed when they wanted to forget the Prime Directive existed.
So you're ready for me to sort of get your brain thinking in new ways?
Okay.
All right. So one of the things I think about, because, NSDM does geopolitics and, I have a political science degree and all that stuff and worked in government. One of the things I started thinking about is how did this all come about? How do you get a group that, got these founding, star-faring powers that all agree to build a federation? And when they build their federation, they start talking about what the rules should be. So, one of the aspects is to think of the politics of the debate. Because you've got, the Tellarites who are supposedly great argumenters, and have an argument over anything. And the Vulcans who are pure logic. But, really look at this. The Prime Directive really smells Vulcan. It feels Vulcan. It is relatively devoid of emotion. It is designed to give a clear, logical response based on examples of problems that involvement includes. Now, mind you, the Vulcans really weren't into non-involvement. They would tend to observe and sneak around in the background and watch lesser races that did not meet their technological or cultural values because they wanted one polity to deal with, or at least all civil polities to deal with. They wanted you to know how to set up a star drive. And once you could do a warp drive, they realized you were a problem. So they had to engage with you. So how did the Vulcans engage with people? Well, they had a couple of wars when people started shooting at them, if you look at the old legends. And the storylines. But the point is, this is a method for the Vulcans to impose a level of order around the Federation. And what's really interesting, and this is where I'm going to get controversial because I was going to wait a little bit, but I'll hit some of it. You realize the morality of this whole directive is cultural hubris. We are superior to you.
Yeah, and we know better.
And it's semi-Darwinist because we don't want to touch you until you can do warp drive.
Oh,
and if you die before you get there,
okay. I'm actually going to push back on you. That I do not believe it is the case that it's we don't want to touch you until you can do warp drive. I think it's more along the lines of let's see how to phrase this. Oh fuck! Now we don't have a choice.
Yes.
Right. Once you get warp drive, it's like, well, you're going to find out that there's aliens out there. So this is a situation we now need to manage.
Yes.
Right. We need to make sure that when it all happens, and that's why, they don't wait until you develop warp drive.
Right.
They see, there's lots of instances where they're monitoring people and they're trying to figure out how close they are. There's one episode of Next Generation where they've got people on the planet trying to figure out how close they are, et cetera, and trying to sort of learn about the society, et cetera, so that when it's time for them to come in and sort of reveal themselves, they have some cultural sensitivity and some understanding about how to execute on that. And so I think it's very much of the warp drive determines how much time they have to work the problem.
Yes. The other thing I noticed with this whole thing is Vulcans seem to have become risk adverse for a lot of things when you look at them culturally, as they went from emotional and violent to very logical. So another aspect of this is they're running an experiment. If I was a logical Vulcan, highly scientific in my approach to things, I would want to treat every one of these entities as a petri dish until I had to not treat it as a petri dish, because I could see how it would develop and what alternatives there were. Because I'm very logical. These creatures are not all logical, and therefore they come up with options and developments that we never would consider.
That may be, but I don't recall that ever even being remotely hinted at.
Oh, it wasn't articulated, except you see some pieces. One piece is the Star Trek episode where they talk about the Vulcan observation post to watch the Andorrans. That was the monastery. And then you've got the other example of them watching Earth so closely because there were observers on planet, as well as then eventually they recognized there was a warp drive involved.
Okay, so the thing with the monastery, though, that's aimed at the Andorrans. It has absolutely nothing to do with scientific research. It's an intelligence collection site.
You're right, but that approach to things peeks its head up on a number of occasions, and I really need to go back and look, because it just dawned on me that this was a perspective that made sense to examine.
This isn't because they want to see how the Andorrans react because they're not logical.
Well, that's true.
This is, we don't trust the Andorrans and we may end up going to war with them, so we're going to collect data on them so
and they've already been at war with them. Yeah. So
I mean, it's pure intel, pure military, and I get the impression that when it comes to Earth, they're monitoring Earth because they think Earth might be a problem, but it isn't, because it isn't this scientific, let's see what sort of theories we can prove.
Yeah. Well, I agree. It wasn't a theory-based experiment, but the surreptitious aspect made me start to think that I need to go back through episodes and sort of see if I can connect the dots. Because I'm not going to do a hard argument that that's absolutely the way they were, but it gives me food for thought that I hadn't had before.
So, and
I blame it on you.
In universe, the Vulcans had a non-interference policy, which DePaul reminds Archer of approximately 700 times. Mm-hmm. I mean, she just won't shut up about it. In Enterprise, Archer, they don't technically have a prime directive, but Archer actually seems to be the most respectful of the prime directive and has the most coherent view of a prime directive. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways. And you sort of watch him developing it. And that's actually, Enterprise, I thought, was at its best when it was doing stuff like that. It was worse when it was trying to explain things. Like for instance, I don't care about the damn forehead ridges. You don't have to explain the forehead ridges to me. I don't want to go off on a sidebar on forehead ridges because I could do an entire episode on forehead ridges. Let's not. But
I'm in for that episode.
Please don't. Please don't.
we should at some point. Kirk says that it's Starfleet's #1 commandment. And it's like, really? Really?
Oh, I would argue that it isn't, but they say it is. And
they say it is, but he's violating it all the time. And it's like, well, but this is an exception. And the lousiest exception, I think, is in the first episode where you see it, Return of the Archons, where Spock says, we can't do this. And he says, well, yeah, but that doesn't apply in this situation, because that's assuming that the culture is not stagnant, and this one's stagnant. It's like, really? You've been there for 3 days and you've determined that it's stagnant.
Plus, you get all the background on what the Prime Directive was all about and how it was done, and the original views of the founders. Is he a strict constructionist, or is he, a living document guy? I mean, come on.
Yeah, he's very much of a. Somebody once described somebody as looking at such and such the same way that Nixon looked at the Constitution, looking for loopholes. And so Kirk spends a lot of time looking for loopholes, I think. In TNG, by the time of TNG, the Prime Directive is a well-established policy that is applied with an intensity matched only by its incoherence. Because in TNG, I would argue, the Prime Directive, it's like they don't understand the difference between means and ends, and they say some things that just don't make sense. It's literally at the level of we need to allow the culture develop naturally. That's why we're going to let the asteroid kill the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense. So I love TNG. I absolutely love TNG. But when it comes to the Prime Directive, I don't think TNG makes any sense whatsoever.
I'm starting to think, though, that there's another alternative theory that would make it make lots of sense. Are you ready for me to be the guy that breaks the China shop right now? This is where you get to call me an idiot. Ready?
You're an idiot. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to wait until after you say it.
Right. The theory is that the Federation is a Vulcan puppet. What? Yeah, a Vulcan puppet. Because the Vulcans forsake emotion, but they saw value in the humans. And essentially, they're the puppet masters. This is a theory, but it has some supporting data, okay? We've heard them talk in different points, like in Mirror Mirror, about the strategy of being a secondary target. And they sort of admire the ingenuity and initiative and somewhat the imperialism of humans, and realize that dynamic is going to be a problem for them if they don't harness it. They understand that humans are bellicose but trainable, because they stepped away from the brink of self-destruction and renounced self-destruction. And they're basically sort of, if we take a junior role in many ways in the Federation, there's a logic to this. It's called the logic of risk. Humans will make us a protective military bubble because they're really good at killing things and fighting things and exploring new spaces. So Vulcans are at risk, and it's all human casualties. Okay.
See, you think that this is some sort of secret plan? I think that this is actually something they teach in Vulcan grade school.
I agree.
Even when there's a human child in the class.
I think that it is part of their logic of risk, because they've turned humanity into their stalking horse. They've got plausible deniability, which, yes, Deline mentioned, okay, and it allows them to play good cop to the humans' bad cop. So when you really look at it, my contention with this theory would be that the Vulcans don't expect the Prime Directive to be followed all the time, or even most of the time. What they expect is that it's a restraint on humanity doing it all the time. Okay? Because even if it's observed sort of in the breach, until they throw it away, it restrains the humans from getting them involved in new conflicts. And it minimizes that, because the humans were going to be the leading force anyway, because their population's growing. They've got all the tools to have a scarcity free society for the most part. They are they're not going to change their basic nature overnight. So they're training us just like humanity took wolves and turned them into dogs. So I want to see how much trouble I can cause with this theory, because the more I think about it, the more it fits.
I think so this is actually funny, because I have my own theory about the Vulcans and the Vulcans' relationship with the rest of the Federation. I think that Vulcan logic doesn't make any sense whatsoever as a general rule, and that the rest of the Federation is basically humoring the Vulcans as part of their non-interference, respecting other cultures, because Vulcan logic does not exist to make good decisions. Vulcan logic does not exist to be logical. Vulcan logic exists to allow Vulcans to constrain their naturally emotive nature, which they fear because it's led to problems in the past, right? Mm-hmm. This is how the Vulcans practice self-control, and so I'm sure that a lot of Vulcans aren't very good at they do logic because they're really trying to be emotionless, and the rest of the Federation is doing the wink wink whenever they try to be logical.
Well, the other thing about this is when you think about how it all integrates, you look at the start of the Federation, and even up through TNG almost, it seems pretty clear that the most technologically advanced society in the Federation is the Vulcans. I mean, I don't really see examples up until you start getting to TNG that there's the same level of equivalence technologically. So another part of how the Vulcans are doing stuff behind the scenes, when you look at like the executive branch of the Federation, it's a very scientific and structured, and you don't see the Vulcans on the front line. They're probably back there in the bureaucracy running the strings.
Okay. We don't see enough of Vulcan technology in the original series to make an assessment one way or the other.
Well, I would agree that part is tenuous, but there's no indication that, how can I put it, they were in space before anybody else, and they were basically the biggest guy on the block for the most part. I mean, they successfully fought the Andorians. They successfully engaged with the Tellarites. They had skirmishes with some fragments of the Romulans, according to some stories.
Okay, what do you mean by successful?
Well, they survived and they won those wars.
Okay, so the North Koreans are successful?
They didn't win the war.
What do you mean they won the war? Where did it say that when the Andorians and the Vulcans fought that the Vulcans won? And what sort of Vulcan propaganda are you listening to?
Well, it could be. But, it got me to thinking about it. And, I don't see any indication that anybody was up to their par in terms of the technology.
I don't see any. Okay, so
they've been in space for hundreds of years before anybody else was doing stuff.
We don't have any data points from the original series. We have data points from Enterprise where Soval, Gary Graham's character, Soval specifically says to Admiral, I can't think of his name. Admiral, what's his name, Alec? The guy.
Admiral Forrest.
Admiral Forrest. I was just reading the bio of the actor earlier today. Where Soval says to Admiral Forrest, in that scene right before Admiral Forrest is killed.
Right.
They have this conversation about it, and Admiral Forrest says, are Vulcans afraid of the humans? And Soval's response is, well, duh. And it basically boils down to, he said, we had a nuclear war with ourselves, and it took us 700 years to recover. You guys recovered in like 70. We're terrified of you guys because you're really fast at this.
And I think that's the issue. I mean, I think that TJ made a comment in the chat that maybe the Vulcans were technologically stagnant. And I would argue, yeah. I mean, it took them a long time to make different innovations, and our timeline stuff that happened relatively fast doesn't take that long. It takes lots longer for them. So, part of the idea behind this argument is that you see these dynamic guys who you can harness as opposed to these dynamic guys that are going to overrun you. You've got to ride the pony because it's running full tilt.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm
So
responding.
you didn't call me an idiot yet. What's with that?
No, I started off by calling you an idiot. I've called you an idiot twice on this show, Merle. You're just not paying attention.
Well, you're going to have a lot of fun tracking that. That'll be the new thing if I ever come back. How many times did you use that?
So, but I think that part of the. So my impression is that the Vulcans do their own thing in addition to the Federation. The Andorians do their own thing in addition to the Federation. Unclear about the Tellarites and some of the other species. Earth really kind of seems to be all in on the Federation, right? I don't think we see any evidence that Earth maintains a separate naval force aside from Starfleet, because of course that was their naval force, right?
Yeah.
Starfleet got turned over to the Federation. We handed the keys to everybody. But you see Vulcan ships that are clearly not Federation ships. They're clearly separate things. And it's sort of like, it would be like if the only U.S. force was under a UN flag, whereas everybody else had national forces plus what they dedicated to the UN.
Well, I'm trying to think if there's any other examples of powers that had their own fleets that were part of the Federation, because we don't even see a lot of variety in designs. If you move into the other shows,
we see that with the Vulcans.
Yeah.
We see that with the Vulcans. I mean, every time you run into one of those ships with one of those funky ring warp generators, that's not a Federation design, that's a Vulcan design.
Sure.
And some of those ships are pretty damn big.
Yeah. And then you look at other powers and their evolution's entirely different. I mean, Romulans seem to be entirely different. Klingons imitated, a couple different sources apparently. The only unique power sources are people who are outside the Federation, except for the Vulcans. I can't think of a single example of a non-Federation style vehicle of any size in the Federation other than Vulcans.
Are we talking? What series are you talking about?
Yeah,
whatever series. I mean, when you start thinking about it, you'll see merchant vessels, but you don't see anything that smells like it's dual purpose.
Well, you see Andorian ships in Enterprise. There's lots of Andorian.
Well, yeah, but they're not part of the Federation at that point.
But neither are the Vulcans.
Yeah.
No, but he's talking later. He's talking later.
I'm talking TOS on. Okay, just for purposes of structure.
This is an interesting research thing. I am suffering from the fact that in my head I've got alpha canon, beta canon, and about 12 role-playing games.
Where do we see Vulcan ships?
I'm sorry, what?
Enterprise.
We see Vulcan ships. I want to say we see them in Next Gen. We see them in Axanar.
Well, you definitely see them in Axanar. We have a very specific take on all of this, but yeah. I don't think you see a Vulcan ship in Next Generation.
I could be wrong. Like I said, I've got a lot of canon running, or a lot of non-canon running in through my head, sort of contaminating things. All right. This is
in fact in the motion picture when Spock arrives, he's arriving on what is a Federation warp shuttle.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So one horse Shay says they were in Unification Part 2, then the Romulans blew them up.
Those were Romulans. Those were. Oh, were the Romulans simulating Vulcan ships? Is that what it was?
We see a Vulcan cruiser in lower decks, according to TJ.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. Research question. We now have a research question to go and look up.
My existence is justified.
Okay, I'll let you round that one up. Merle and I work together in a lot of projects. Okay, so reasons for the Prime Directive. Reasons given, I'm not claiming that this is a complete list. It restricts dangerous technology. Archer explicitly discusses that, of course, not the Prime Directive, right? Because it's pre-Prime Directive, but it's part of that rationale that it restricts restriction of dangerous technology and distributing dangerous technology. Protecting culture from contamination. Kirk and Spock have an extensive discussion about this in Return of the Archons. Respecting rights is mentioned multiple times, the right of the culture to develop and, right of non-interference, et cetera, et cetera. And in at least one episode of Enterprise, it is described in terms of evolution because Phlox should know better that evolution is not about, this is not the right way to look at evolution. Phlox is making the argument that he shouldn't help solve a genetic problem in this one race because of evolution, that he should just let them all die.
Yeah, now, there's a very humane process. I mean,
I'm sorry, what?
The whole Prime Directive thing is not very humane, because you really get down to it. It has it has a couple of underlying concepts that if you were a real hardcore Bismarckian diplomat, you would phrase as things like, suffer you fools, you can expect to extinct yourself, stew in your own juices, we don't want to have to put ourselves out to do any work for you, and it's really hypocritical in that regard. So the good things about it is it sort of protects the autonomy of a culture with the chance that you will avoid like Columbian disasters. Columbus comes into the world and everybody dies of smallpox, or they all get enslaved, or things along that line. But, it's also supposed to protect you from the law of unintended consequences, because it's like the old time travel stories about I stepped on a butterfly in the age of the dinosaurs kind of thing. It also theoretically protects unique developments. So if they've come up with something cool, we can pick it up and let them develop it.
Okay, so for those who didn't catch that, what happened is Alec's phone rang. Yeah. So he's talking on his phone right now.
So the other thing that I think is underlying the whole concept of the Prime Directive, which you could argue is either good or flawed, is that there's an assumption of progress and a movement to maturity. Because
in fact, Kirk explicitly talks about that when his justification for interviewing with Landru when Return of the Archons is that this culture is not progressing, it's stagnating, and therefore I'm allowed to do this.
Sure. I mean, there's an important philosophical base to all this stuff. Yeah. And that's why one of my arguments for the show is that it's meant to be honored more commonly in the breach than in the other.
I think there's some
how many people violate the Prime Directive and get away with it as long as it gets a good result?
All of them.
Exactly.
Now, I would argue, though, that the problem that we run into is that there isn't a coherent philosophical basis behind it because the writer's room isn't that smart.
Well, also theoretically, we don't see the failures because failures aren't good stories.
Well, that could be too. But I mean, my point in all of this is that we're talking about the Prime Directive. There is no the Prime Directive. There's about 15 different Prime Directives because no two of them match, right? And you see multiple examples in Next Gen. The Prime Directive gets turned into anything like, if they don't have warp travel yet and their star's going to explode and we can stop it, we'll just go ahead and let it happen because it's supposed to happen. I mean, it's almost this predestination thing that anything that happens between warp travel before warp travel is designed to happen.
Well, it's easy to think that you're successful because it was destiny and because you deserved it and everybody else didn't.
Yeah, it's problematic. It's problematic.
Yeah,
there are triggers that
go on.
I was going to say there are triggers that they use to set it aside warp flight is one. And like I said before, I think what's really going on there is that once you've developed warp travel, you're going to run into the rest of the universe. So the rest of the universe might as well make that process as painless as possible.
And we might as well see that you hear about it through our filters.
And we do see that if there's cultural contamination, like if it's broken, if we accidentally broke it by leaving a communicator behind or leaving a book on gangsters, on gangsters, we have to go fix it.
Yeah.
If there's foreign interference, the Klingons are giving one side guns, we give the other side guns.
So my argument is there's probably a secret council of Vulcans that all sit in the background and say, you're not cleared for this information to everybody else, and says Prime Directive is solid, because nobody ever gets punished if it turns out well. We just want the ability to disavow you.
The biggest trigger to violating the Prime Directive is that the story said it had to happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's mostly, I don't think it's coherent in the approach at all.
Well, absolutely. And in the original series in particular, every episode acted like it stood alone. And that's part of the other stuff you wanted me to come in and talk about sometime, because I did a pitch.
Yeah.
But we won't give them the foreshadowing on that. But essentially it's, everything was episodic and it stood by itself. And that was less so in TNG, and definitely much less so in DS9 and some of the successors, because people got more concerned about continuity. In the 60s, it was all about telling a good story from a high quality science fiction writer. And if it connected to anything else or had ripples to anything else, we basically acted like it didn't happen.
No, they acted like it didn't happen. This is one of the things that drives me crazy, is that the writer's room, the story writers assume that the audience doesn't care about that stuff. I was 10 years old and I was going like, what the hell is going on here? That they, the aliens take over the Enterprise because they need to go back to Andromeda. They've modified the drive so it can now go warp 1 billion. And hey, and then they leave at the end, and it's like, hey, the Enterprise can now go warp 1 billion. It's like, yeah, no, it can't. We just forgot.
Yeah,
we forgot. So Wright says that he violates the Prime Directive daily. Right? You need to stop interfering with lower cultures. So stay in Florida.
About America, right? He's
stay in Florida. Don't go to Alabama, right?
You said that on air. I don't believe you said that on air. Next thing you know, you tell the joke about the IQ of each state went up when a guy moved from one to the other.
Okay, so now let's take a look at a few theoretical examples, right? And the first one is, hey, aliens in orbit, why do you waste your time with travel? We decided against developing warp drive years ago and just stay home and do drugs. So warp travel, my point here is that warp travel isn't a magical measure. It's a practical indication that contact is going to happen anyway. And hence the Federation needs to step in to manage that contact properly. So people, I think, put too much of an emphasis on the warp travel part. Warp travel is just that isolation is no longer an option at that point. The next one is, well, Captain, the asteroid will hit in 400 years, but the medieval civilization, the cloud-covered world, will never see it coming. So can you contaminate a culture if they never knew you were there and there's no way for them to ever figure out you were there? Especially if in the process of, you're preventing the asteroid from destroying the planet. Yes, we have slaves, lots and lots of slaves. Is that going to be a problem? I mean, I will note every single like almost canon source out there says that the Klingons have slave races.
Oh yeah. Plus the other thing is, what happens if the organ leggers are around? We cannibalize other people for our existence. Or people are meat, Soylent Green. I mean, come on. Is that okay? Yeah. How would the Prime Directive handle those things?
Now, this is actually really interesting from the standpoint that there's a few episodes where the answer in all of this is they're not human, right? Like don't look at it through human eyes. They're not human.
Yeah.
They see it differently than we do. And, all the pieces parts don't go together in the same way that we would do that.
Well, I don't want to go too far with this, especially by bringing in new stuff with old stuff. But, the new version of the Gorn is a classic case of we should let them use our bodies as parasitic breeding facilities. Under the Prime Directive, we should let them take our bodies.
Is this some reference to some Discovery thing?
Yeah, it's the newest Star Trek iteration where they've turned the Gorn into a large, fast reptilian race that plants eggs in people and basically goes from there.
Okay. Well,
it's one of those that you're not watching, and I find it somewhat entertaining. But I turn on the suspend disbelief and I get out the little flash thing because there's entertainment, and then there's real science fiction, and then there's Star Trek in the concepts, and you have to build firewalls between all of them, or you will go insane.
Yeah,
it's like after the ending of the second season of Discovery, I'm sort of going, and it's like, yeah,
Gorn xenomorphs.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is this going to be a fair fight, sir, or is this another bug hunt? Yeah.
The other thing is, what if we had some of the critters from other series? The critter from Aliens, the replicators from the Stargate shows.
They don't have prime directives in either Aliens or Stargate.
Yeah, but I mean, if you had those kind of critters show up in a Star Trek universe, how would you look at it from the prime directive standpoint?
I don't think they either one of those are civilization.
Yeah, we got a comment that it's a bug.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
So the last comment I have here is Archer saying they're not ready, and that's in Dear Doctor. That's the same one where Phlox is advocating for allowing the genetic thing to kill the entire race. But this is one where they basically say, hey, look, we need some help with this, and we'd like to go out to the stars and do this, but we don't have warp drive. Can you give us warp drive?
Yeah.
And Archer specifically walks through, I can't remember who he's talking to, like Trip or Malcolm or somebody like that. And he says, look, in order for them to have warp drive, they need antimatter. They're not ready for antimatter yet. They have no experience handling antimatter. It's really, really dangerous. It took us a long time to get this right. And it's basically, I mean, you can make the argument that they just don't, they don't know what they're getting into.
Yeah, we don't want them to make themselves extinct before they have a chance to grow a little more.
Yeah, it's sort of the equivalent of saying, give us the samples give us the Ebola samples. We want to do some research on it. It's like, do you have a level 5 biofacility? Oh, what's a level 5 biofacility? Yeah, I'm not giving you the samples until you've got some experience in running a level 5 biofacility.
Yeah.
By the way, I believe, if I remember correctly, there are 3 level 5 biofacilities like on planet Earth. So I mean, that was just a practical matter of saying, like, yeah, this is, and I don't want to infantilize them by saying it's like handing a loaded gun to a child, but it's more along the lines of, like handing something to somebody when they don't have any preparation on how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They just don't have it. So, okay. This is one of the last 2 slides. So the first slide here is let's try rebuilding the prime directive into something coherent, because I think it's actually kind of incoherent right now. I would argue it's really about minimizing interference and maximizing stability. Those seem to be the things that they care about.
So in other words, you think they're a status quo power?
No, because you can maximize stability by making change.
Okay. I can buy that line of reasoning.
Now, stagnant has a tendency to be stable, so maybe that's not exactly a good description. But they're trying to avoid situations where the sort of the premise is that they can cause cultural instability by interfering, and so let's not interfere. And so some of it is at the level of Cisco's told not to interfere with Bajoran politics. Okay, they're a space-going society. They'd probably have developed warp travel on their own if the Cardassians hadn't come in and smacked them. They certainly have access to other people's warp capabilities, even if they didn't develop them on their own. They know all about the Federation. They know all about Cardassia, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not giving anything away by telling them about any of this stuff. But Cisco is told, don't interfere with internal politics, because interference is bad. Right. Aside from cultural contamination, interference is bad, right? They're trying to get Bajor to the point of Bajor. He gets told, prepare Bajor to join the Federation, but don't interfere with their internal politics while doing it.
Right. While you're considered an element of prophecy. But anyway, so I would suggest you change your first bullet and make it mitigating instability rather than maximizing stability.
That's a good change. That's a good change.
Oh my gosh, something other than Merle's an idiot. Okay.
I
know I'm teasing. You know I'm teasing.
No, don't put words in my mouth.
I do that all the time. It's a lot of fun.
So there's avoiding cultural and technological contamination. I forgot the word contamination there. And we see that Kirk has to pretend he's not a Starfleet guy when he's dealing with the American Indians on the planet. And in between is don't screw them up, right? Yeah. So at some level, there's a don't touch them. Just don't touch them if you can avoid it. And if you have to go down there, you have to hide who you are, et cetera, et cetera. Long list of things you're not allowed to talk about. Like if they start talking about space, just whistle and look away, that sort of stuff. I think the more alien the society, the more the policy makes sense, because you don't necessarily know what's going on in the society. Yep. I, as a human Starfleet officer, can't necessarily predict what those guys are going to do. I don't necessarily have the cultural tools to understand them. And the more cultural the issue, the more the policy makes sense.
You can actually predict what Starfleet people do?
Well, Okay, so this picture. Tell me about this picture, Merle. Why did I put that picture there? What is it a picture of?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember where it's come, which episode it's from. And I don't. I'm going to fail this.
Can you name which series it's from?
I think that's a TNG, isn't it? No, that doesn't have the right look.
Yeah, as Bob says, it's Babylon percentage.
Yeah,
it's Babylon 5.
Ah, no wonder. Yeah,
this is the episode Believers, the one where Dr. Franklin violates the Prime Directive, and the kid ends up dead anyway.
Now they just look like Klingons, but they're not. Yeah, got it.
What is interesting about those actors?
I think we've seen both of them in Star Trek too, haven't we?
Anybody out there know?
I'm hearing crickets.
So the actress, I do not remember her name, but she's the actress who played Rachel Garrett in yesterday's Enterprise. So she was in the best episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. I would argue the best single thing that came out of the franchise. She was the guest star in it. Yeah, Patricia O'Neill, or yeah, something like that. Trisha O'Neill. And she's in a really, really good episode of Babylon 5, and she's retired now. So, okay, last slide. I think it's the last slide. I'm pretty sure it's the last slide. It's the last slide. So let's try to turn this into something coherent. And I think part of the incoherence that we see, especially in Next Generation, is that they don't differentiate between the means discussion and the ends discussion. They have a tendency to just sort of lump them all together as the prime directive. But so it's really an imprecision of language problem, I think. And so I think you need to split it into the ends. What is the goal of Federation intervention? And the means, how is the Federation going to intervene? Because you can get half of it right and still get it wrong.
Oh, yeah. I like the way you've laid that out.
Yeah. So, like, what is the goal of Federation intervention? A bad goal of Federation intervention is I don't like the choices they're making, so I'm going to try to convince them to make different choices.
Well, there still are gray areas in this layout that you've got, like the slavery question.
There's still gray areas. I'm not saying it's.
I mean, imagine the Federation comes to Earth, and the Federation is not an Earth-based process, and they see the American Civil War. How would you look at that?
I think in that case they say it's regrettable, but we're not going to intervene, because I think that falls into the I don't like the bad choice. I don't like the choices they are making. But it's not, the difference between the good one and the bad one there is the good intervention is like, the asteroid is going to wipe out civilization. It's like there something has to be done or they all die, right? So there's no giving the culture room to grow if the asteroid wipes them out, right? How well did the dinosaurs culture grow? So the means, on the other hand, how is the Federation going to intervene? Okay, so you've decided that maybe you just need to intervene, but there's a difference between let's pretend to be angels and lead them in the right direction versus let's divert the asteroid without them knowing.
So here's another thing. I mean, I can't think that they actually addressed this anywhere, but you have a lot more comprehensive knowledge. Maybe you do. What do you do if there's no intelligent species?
They don't care.
So we can go in and do whatever we want. Take pigeons for scientific experiments?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they've ever really talked about that. But yeah.
And what's their test for intelligence? We never really see that discussed either, because that would be about an important
setting or something. I mean, the tricorder gives them there's no hard problem that they can't come up with an easy solution by just waving a tricorder at it. I mean, like you see that in Enterprise when they've got a tricorder that has a setting that tells you if something went through time. Really? You've got it can detect your little handheld device can tell if something really? Yeah, it's kind of
It doesn't have to make sense. It's meant for plot.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would argue that when push comes to shove, civilization can't develop naturally if it's destroyed. But even in situations where you're preventing a civilization from being destroyed, there's a right way and a wrong way to go about doing it. And the prime directive was really about cultural growth. It wasn't about death. So, like, if you can deflect the asteroid, you need to do that. If you can do it without the locals knowing that you did it, you need to do it that way. And that's why I think the TNG era prime directive was such a shit show, because Jean-Luc Picard is saying things like, oh, just let them all die. Just let them all die. Because prime directive, right? We can't stop that asteroid. We're not allowed to stop the asteroid because somehow that's going to lead to cultural growth by killing them all.
Some culture, maybe not this one.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, there wouldn't be us. I mean, come on.
Then if that's the conclusion that you reached, Starfleet, then maybe you've got no business boldly going anywhere. I mean, that's really the fundamental thing here, right? To boldly go out and explore, et cetera, but when you get there, you're not allowed to touch anything. Does that make any sense?
Well, you might break it.
Well, okay, then stay home. There's no point in going out any place in that case.
Yeah. Do we go out to dinner or not? Yeah, I gotcha.
And it's very easy to turn everything into predestination.
Yeah, it is. And Star Trek in the vision of the future, in some weird way, is a fantasy about predestination.
It is.
Especially since it's human-centric. If it was Vulcan-centric, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to be human-centric since the people making the TV show are humans.
And the audience.
More or less.
So, yeah.
More or less.
We're pandering. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a Charlie Strauss short story where at one point a character is asked, "Are you human?" And his response was, "Yes," he said, emphatically oversimplifying. Which I thought was fantastic. That's Antibodies, by the way, which is a fantastic short story that I reread about every 6 months. And I reread like last week. So, okay. So let's see. Alec has just dropped off at some point. At some point, he disappeared from the background. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the stage because we're done there. Okay. So we are actually a little bit over. Shocking. Since we've, I think, finished this is episode 178. I think we've had about 4 episodes that have finished on time. So I guess, Merle, I would ask you the question, is there any... Well, first of all, tell me if there's any closing comments that you have. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go take a quick look through the...
Okay, so I'm the guy who gets to stall, but okay.
I don't think there's any questions because I've been sort of tracking as we go through, but go ahead.
I have too. The biggest thing to me is that you can look at this through lots of different lenses, and you probably should, because it's meant to spur your imagination. That's why I sort of took off with this whole it's a Vulcan conspiracy thing, because the more I thought about it, it fits some of the facts and it makes it interesting. The other part of it is, you have to think about how organizations and groups evolve and how decisions are made, because there are compromises all along the way. You realize the Federation is a huge organization with a large number of very different peoples. I mean, it's sort of like our UN gone amok, and all the side committees and meetings and whatever, and then they sift it, and then it moves. What's really remarkable is that they apparently seem to make some decisions relatively quickly. With that large number of critters involved, of various races and species, you would think it would be osmosis central and ossification central in terms of doing things. But they've come up with a set of principles that were apparently developed by a relatively small number of races in discussion that other races adopted as the Federation got bigger. But the bigger it gets, the more unwieldy it becomes. And, we still see a lot of weirdness. So what you see in the later shows is the modern interpretation that, command and control with a handful of people like Section 51 or whatever is more and more the thing. But that, strange as it sounds, is sort of a common evolution of organizations when they realize they have to move more quickly.
Okay. Dustin asks about Enterprise C, whether it broke the Prime Directive. I would agree with what Olive said. They were all spacefaring civilizations, and one was under attack. Prime Directive is about protecting non-spacefaring civilizations.
Yeah.
And so in this case, it didn't apply. Let's see. Yeah, he points out, you said section 51. It's section 31, area 51.
Yeah, area 51, section 31.
So area 51.
Yeah.
B52.
Right.
Section 31.
Okay. So the other thing is they weren't really concerned about keeping the cultural integrity of Khan and his guys. But of course, they have been exterminated on Earth, and they weren't really an independent culture, right?
They weren't a civilization. They were a bunch of criminals on the run.
Yeah. Okay. But that was a civilization before they ran away.
Yeah. Yeah, but they were Earth civilization, right? It's hardly, you can't really interfere with yourself.
I don't know. There's a lot of people that argue we do that all the time. Anything else we've missed?
I'm going back.
I did like the Ferengi allusions in some of the discussion.
Borg versus xenomorphs. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. The other one would be interesting. I would really like us to take a closer look at Tholians, because they show up so rarely and they're so different. And then between the gaming systems and the fiction, there's so many weird alternatives for how they came about and why they're there. And so suggested topic for the future is probably a 30-minute show, maybe not a full show, but who knows? We have a tendency to make everything take a little longer.
Okay, I'm tracking something down here real quick.
Okay. Now we're sneaking in the Babylon 5 references. Well,
yeah,
in Star Trek, the Tellarites, what was it? Vulcans and Klingons supposedly had this thing. It wasn't open the gun port; it was shoot first, so we respect you.
So Delon says Vulcans decide something, then they figure out lots of BS to justify it, and then call it logic. And then he refers to Quark, and I wasn't tracking it, and so I asked for a follow-on. And Delon said Quark pointed out that Quark pointed out to a Vulcan terrorist that when she was willing to pay any price for peace, he pointed out the cost for peace was very low, and she was going to raise the price. So, yeah, Vulcan terrorists are an interesting thing because, apparently they think it's logical.
Yeah. The whole basis for a bad movie. Oh, for a messed up movie. Yeah.
Yeah, Wright commented it would be hilarious if, like, the Australians had their own navy.
Yes. I think that would be great. It would show their independence once again.
I'd like to see the Australians have a navy now. I shouldn't say stuff like that. I am reminded, though, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the show. The Australians apparently bought a ship that's got a great big mission bay, except the problem is the mission bay, it has a low ceiling and the stanchions are too close together, and it doesn't have any excess power, and it doesn't have a way to get in and out of the mission bay. And so basically they have an unusable attic. And so this strikes me entirely like it fits in the category of the vendors sold them something that they didn't fully appreciate what they were getting, right? It's like, hey, we're going to give you this extra capability. And it's like, okay. And so, to put on my old DOD hat, this is why you have to have a decent requirements process. And whatever people say about what's known as the JSIDS process, which the SecDef got rid of, they got rid of the process, but it was a process whereby you defined what it was that you wanted so that you could then go and get that. If you just say, I want a ship, and they bring you a ship, then by definition, they gave you what you wanted.
Oh, yeah. And the stuff that I've done for projects and stuff in the past, here's the requirements list, and here's the absolute I don't want list. because sometimes there's a conflict. It's remarkable how many people just aren't thinking ahead. And the key is you have to think about it holistically, or you're going to get a suboptimum answer. Not that you're ever going to necessarily get an optimum one, but it's along the same lines of, if all I do is buy off the shelf stuff so I can field it fast, that's okay. But if I don't set up requirements, nobody's trying to improve it in the way I need it.
Well, the U.S. Navy's run into the situation recently. You see this happening with the Constellation class frigate. We're going to get it cheap because it's going to be off the shelf. Oh, by the way, we want you to make all these changes.
Sure. Well, contract changes are where the contractor makes all this money, and they're all game about not mentioning it to you beforehand. They talk about all the great features they have and why you want them.
I don't think this is the contractor. I think this is purely the Navy.
Oh, I think there's self-dilution involved, yeah.
Because I used to have a Navy.mil email address. I've never run into an organization that was as capable as the United States Navy in adopting the conclusion slide while simultaneously rejecting the assumption slide. I mean, somebody would get up and say, if we assume that you make no changes to the design, it will be the cheapest thing you've ever bought. The Navy is perfectly capable of saying, great, cheapest we've ever bought. That's fantastic. We want the following changes.
Yeah.
And then they go, but you told us it was going to be the cheapest we'd ever. Well, okay, but you rejected the assumption slide. You do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, Delon pointed out somebody should have been held accountable for the prime directive stuff. What's his name? Tom Paris was almost held accountable. Tom Paris got sent to the brig for 30 days and got busted a rank.
So he experienced pain because he violated the directive. Because you got to set an example to the rest of the batch that, you better have a really good result if you violate the directive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Bob points out they're really kind of morality plays.
Very much, especially the early show.
A lot of the early ones were, yeah.
Yeah, as you move through time, they move into more traditional drama, but, TNG has a lot of morality plays. But almost every episode of the original series was that.
Yeah, Dustin points out that Starfleet sometimes gets caught with their pants down while trying to save how often Federation has gotten Starfleet with their pants down. I think just not being ready for a fight. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently. I mean, I think this is why, if you look at Starfleet, almost all their ships look like they're warships in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's because the Federation is constantly expanding in size. Starfleet has to constantly expand in size. And they don't have time to build a war fleet if they need to go to war. And so this is kind of the equivalent of, we're just going to put a harpoon on every merchant ship. Because if nothing else, then we've got a bunch of ships that have harpoon on them.
It's an expedient. It's basically, you've got to multitask. You've got to have a multi-purpose ship. And it's going to sub-optimize, which is part of the reason when they really get into a fight, if they ran into a peer competitor, they're in trouble. What they're counting on is numbers when they run into somebody who's not a peer competitor, because they don't have time to build a brand new fleet. And they don't seem to build any specifically combat-oriented ships till much later.
I'm sorry, say that again?
They don't seem to build any combat specifically built ships. They're not built for combat.
Yeah, there's only a handful of them, like the Defiant was specifically intended as a warship. I had this conversation with Andy actually yesterday. And he pointed out the Franz Joseph designed the Federation class Dreadnought, which is canonized. It was in the motion picture, I think, as the Entente, USS Entente. We see it in the background, or we see at least listed, and it's been canonized.
Right.
And my response to him was, I don't see anything in that ship that tells me that it doesn't meet all the standard Explorer criteria. right? I don't see anything that does, I think that primary hull is chock full of science labs, et cetera, et cetera. They just sort of decided like let's combine and explore with a dedicated warship, and they got something that was way too expensive for them ever to be able to afford to build in any sort of bulk numbers, and so they kind of went back to what they were doing
Well,
before.
I think the other thing is they designed all their components for scientific purposes for the most part, and then they're trying to adapt them. They're not building fit to purpose. So the Excelsior is like, I had a basic idea for design, and it sort of looks kind of like this, and then they tried to put as many weapons on as they could, kind of, sort of.
Oh, I think actually that all that stuff is. I think with phasers, you can sort of hang them anywhere as long as you got the power. So the important part is to make sure it's got the power. But I think they always have a requirement that says we need X amount of phasers.
Well, the issue is amount of power.
We need like one phaser for every X thousand tons. I think that's
okay. So if that's the criteria, why isn't it just a whole bunch of nacelles in a very small, hull for everything else? Because they made the whole thing bigger.
There's about
it's not holding phasers.
There's about 50 episodes of Starfleet Tactical you need to watch to understand that, and it basically boils down to that secondary hull is where all the power is generated, and if you want to have all those nacelles, you need to have a big enough secondary hull to power them all.
Okay.
So, TJ pointed out Hesperia is the planet of the Renfair players. I don't know where that came from, but it was funny enough to mention. Stephen Ross mentions the film Iron Sky, that the only country that didn't earn their spacecraft was Sweden. I don't think that's correct. I think it was like Finland. I don't think it was Sweden. I think it was Lithuania or something like that. I think it was a smaller country. I don't think it was Sweden. I could be wrong on that. But Iron Sky is absolutely fantastic. It's about the Nazis on the moon, and President Palin sends an expedition back to the moon as part of her re-election campaign, and they discover that there are Nazis on the moon. And the Nazis discover the iPad that one of the astronauts has, and they realize that that'll solve all the computing power of the iPad will solve the problem that will allow them to launch their giant space battleship, because they don't have a good computer for it. And so they come to Earth to get iPads, and hijinks ensue. And it's a fantastic movie. I really liked it. Okay. Yeah, Dustin asks, how much was the cost overrun of the first Gerald Ford compared to the other three? I don't know, but the first one's always more expensive because A, you're trying to fix everything to make sure it works right, and B, you're trying to learn how to build it.
I think Wright has an interesting idea. We should do an Iron Sky watch along.
If he can figure out how to do that, that won't immediately generate a copyright strike, let me know.
Yeah. Can't we do that with like Signal or something? So right after it's sent, it gets deleted.
Okay, I'm back to close to the beginning, and I'm not seeing. I think I'm back close to the beginning. Okay. Oh.
So while you're doing that, I'll encourage people to come see NSDM at one of the conventions we go to.
Yes.
We have representation at Origins, Gen Con, and Dragon Con every year, and we're now entering our 36th year of existence. We're the longest running event at Origins, and that's part of our regular shtick. And we do some academic and professional venues. So go check out the website. We'll be updating it with our stuff for the new season soon, because we've got to get all our stuff in for Origins like into December, more or less.
The original team that put NSDM together was Mark and Dan McDonough. Mark is a retired submarine officer. Dan was a retired SWO. Dan is no longer with us, unfortunately. But they both spent some time in Newport. Dan was actually on the War College. Was Mark on the War College faculty?
He was in the wargaming team.
Yeah, he was in the
supported
wargaming
the
department.
college, but was in their wargaming section.
Yeah, and Dan was like across the street in teaching, I think, if I remember correctly.
Correct. He was in a teaching billet temporarily.
And so they basically decided to take a Naval War College style activity and turn it into an event that regular human beings could play. And Dan claimed credit for naming McCarty Little Hall, which is the wargaming department hall over at the Naval War College. And I used to tell Dan that there was a giant statue of him in the lobby of McCarty Little Hall, and that wargame players would go up to the balcony on the second floor and reach over and rub his nose for luck. And I got to take Dan and Mark on a tour of the wargame building there, McCarty Little Hall, because he had never been in it. They had built it like 5 years previously, and he had never seen it. Neither one of them had seen it. But they were in town for something else. They were doing an NSDM event with the Sea Cadets on the other side of the Naval Station Newport. And so I took them over. It's like 8 o'clock at night, and we go over, and I had to explain to Dan that the statue was out for cleaning. So he had just missed it. If he had come like 6 hours earlier, they'd just taken it out that
I can visualize his reaction to that.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. But
and then we went down in the secure building and had a classified discussion for 2 hours.
But Dan was a lot of fun, and Mark is also a lot of fun, but he's the quiet brother. And they were basically asked to go down to the Combined Origins and Dragon Con convention in 1990 and show civilians how they gamed. And since that time, we've refined and improved and done enough that we've been asked to some really interesting places. So, did National Defense University, done Ashland University, Ball State, a few other places, doing a private high school now twice a year. So it's working out really great. We're having a lot of fun with it, and we're not in it for the money, so it's all good.
So, all right, I think it's about time to call it. Like I said previously, not going to do a show next week because I'm going to be at the PhilCon Science Fiction Convention. Anybody who's at PhilCon, stop by and say hi. Bob, that's you at the very least. And I plan on going and seeing the USS New Jersey before the con starts. So I might have some photos from a trip to New Jersey. So I think Dustin said Chris going on Liberty, basically. So yeah. He's in the Chris Library. That's actually the following weekend. So the following weekend. So the 15th is not the 15th, the 22nd next week. I am in PhilCon. The weekend after that, I am visiting my library. So Wright says, touch the USS Enterprise nameplate, please. Where's there a USS Enterprise nameplate on the battleship New Jersey? CV6. Is that at the New Jersey? Why would it be at the New Jersey? If it's there, I'll touch it for you. Which is a phrase that's really important to have in context.
Yeah, very much.
Really important to have in context. Okay, so one last thing. As always, I am totally and completely stunned by the fact that everybody wants to come spend their Saturday night with me and Merle. And so thank you very much for Merle for joining us. So thank you. Thanks to Alec, although he's not watching probably. And thank you to everybody in the audience for showing up and asking good questions, et cetera, et cetera. And so I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks now. And with that in mind, see you all soon.
Hope we were entertaining.